now. Another important item, if you did not register via WebEx and you might be sharing a connection with other individuals, please email me your name this morning to make sure that you receive appropriate credit for the for webinar attendance. We will provide a workshop evaluation survey via email after the webinar, so please stay tuned to that. You will also receive a certificate, again, within 2 weeks, but generally much sooner. Last but not least, before I turn the webinar over to Latasha, a little bit of promotion for the TTA Center. We recently launched a new calendar feature on the TTA website, which is ncpreventiontta.org, and you can click on the Training Center button that's on the middle of the page. And we have launched the new calendar view. This is a sample of the new calendar view that we are testing out. The calendar includes a Pinboard view, which is this view, an agenda view, and a month calendar view that lists trainings via month. So it can be easily shared. Calendar events can be added to your Outlook or Google Calendars and so forth. And these calendar entries lead to our registration page as well. We hope, again, that this will be a much more user-friendly calendar system for providers in the state. So, other than that, just a final reminder to use the mute capability with your technology. And Latasha, I will hand it over to you.
Good morning. So just right before this call, I got a coughing spell, so I'm hoping my throat is going to clear up any minute now. But I am Latasha Murray, the Substance Abuse Prevention Program Director for Robinson Healthcare Corporation. Can everyone hear me okay, other than the frog that's in my throat right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. I've been in this substance abuse prevention field for over 20 years, and I am a certified substance abuse prevention consultant. So certainly I thank everyone for joining this webinar today on ethics, and I hope that you find it informative, and I look forward to your input and your participation. And can you all see the ethics slide on your screens?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. So to begin, I want to start off by saying that the work that we do as prevention professionals today is certainly much more than just going into the classroom and teaching about the dangers of drugs and alcohol to our youth. Prevention professionals have the task of working collaboratively within our community and within our agencies and with the stakeholders in the communities to implement evidence-based policies, practices, and programs. We find ourselves on a daily basis brokering deals in our community with stakeholders to find the best resources to help better our communities and the environment that we live in. So we're also handling local, state, and federal funds, and we have the responsibility of having to be accountable for how we spend those funds. We're building relationships and trust with old and new partners, and in order to be successful at what we do, we have to have standards and principles to follow. We have to act ethically. Can we all agree to that? And I know a lot of you got your phones on mute, so I may ask you a question, but then keep going. But definitely feel free to jump in. And I'm also looking at the chat, so thank you. So our objectives for today's webinar is to define what is ethics. And then we're going to look at the term applied ethics. We're going to look at some ethical decision-making models. We're going to discuss what our obligations are as prevention professionals. And in doing so, we're going to take a look at a general code of ethics. We're going to look at the Practice Board ethical principles of conduct. And then we're going to look at the ICRC professional growth and responsibility, which is domain 6. Then we're going to talk some about ethics in the workplace. And then we're going to give examples from the field. And that's why I'm certainly looking forward to your participation in giving some examples of some ethical dilemmas that maybe you face on your job or in the community and how you've had to handle them. So I'm really hoping that this is going to be an interactive webinar and that you all are going to chime in with your thoughts and your ideas as we go through our slides. So let's begin with the word ethics. Now, I want you to, some of you have your cell phones nearby, I'm sure, or you may be, you're on your computers. I want you to Google or look up the word ethics. And I'm going to give everybody, or those of you, that can do it for me, in a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds to just look up the word ethics. And I'm doing that because there are several different definitions of ethics. So I want us to just kind of explore what some of those definitions are. And once you find a definition, you can either take your phone off mute and tell me what you find, or if you want to put it in the chat box, we'll come back to it and read it. So has anybody, okay, so I see that someone has said that moral principles that govern a person's behavior or conducting of an activity. Medical ethics also enter into question, certainly. Some synonyms that go with ethics: moral code, morals, morality, values, rights. Thank you so much, Mina.
I found ethics, a moral philosophy or code of morals practiced by a person or group of people.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Janae. And so the definition that I have on the slide is ethics provides a set of standards for behavior that helps us decide how we ought to act in a range of situations. And so I want us to look at some terms that relate to the word ethics. And the first term that we're going to look at is the term applied ethics. And applied ethics deals with issues in private or public life that are matters of ethical judgment. So we're going to explore this term, applied ethics, a little more. So terms that relate to applied ethics are obligatory. And when you say that something is obligatory, the definition of it says, we mean that it is not only right to do, but that it is wrong not to do it. In other words, we have an ethical obligation to perform the action. Sometimes the easiest way to see an action is ethically obligatory is to look at what it means not to perform that action. So what I would like for you to think about is, what is an example of what we would consider something that's ethically obligatory? Do anybody have any ideas or any thoughts about an action that would fit this definition? Yes, reporting abuse.
Neglect.
Neglect, yes. Thank you.
Harm to oneself or another.
Yes, yes. That's great. Thank you. And so another example might be that parents are ethically obligatory to care for their children, not only because it is the right thing for them to do, but also because it is wrong for them not to do it. So what would happen if parents didn't care for their children? The children would suffer. The children could die if parents don't take care of them. So parents are ethically obligated to take care of their children. You guys, and I'm sorry about all the coughing. So our next term that we're going to explore is impermissible. And this is the opposite of an ethically obligatory action, in that the action is ethically impermissible, meaning that it is wrong to do and right not to do it. So can you think of any examples of this term? So an example, I'm sorry, say it again.
Confidentiality with a patient or client.
Okay. And I see where somebody said stealing money or supplies. And another example would be, let's just say murder. It is ethically impermissible. It is wrong to do, and it is right not to do it. Okay? And so the next term that we're going to explore in applied ethics is permissible. And sometimes actions are referred to as ethically permissible or ethically neutral because it is neither right nor is it wrong to do them or not to do them. So I want you to put your thinking caps on again and see if you can give me an example of what permissible, ethically permissible would be. So we might say that having plastic surgery is ethically permissible because it's not wrong to have the surgery. It is not impermissible, but neither is it ethically necessary, which is obligatory to have the surgery. So now that I've given that example, can you think of any other examples? Okay, so we'll move on to our next term. Supererogatory is the fourth type of ethical action, and these types of actions are seen as going above and beyond the call of duty. They are right to do, but it's not wrong not to do them. So can you think of an example that fits this term? something that is going above and beyond the call of duty. So let me give you an example. Two people are walking down a hallway, and they see a third person drop their book bag, and it spills their books and papers onto the floor. If one person stops to help the third person pick up their books, but the other person keeps on walking, we somehow feel that the person who stopped to help has acted in a more ethically appropriate way than the person who did not stop. But we cannot say that the person who did not stop was unethical in not stopping. In other words, the person who did not help was in no way obligated, to stop or help. But nevertheless, we want to ethically praise the person who did stop. So we call this person's action supererogatory. And then I see where somebody also commented, providing transportations to a client who cannot make it to the office for a service. Yes, going, especially if that's not something that you're required to do, you went above the call of duty. Are there any other examples?
Holding the door open for someone, or not necessarily holding the door open for someone?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We call that being a gentleman, but absolutely. Any other examples before I move on? Okay, so we work in our communities to help make them better. The following principles are ones that are most commonly appealed to in applied ethical decisions, and in my opinion, are useful guiding principles for the work that we do. So the term that we're going to look at now, or some of the principles that we're going to look at now, are referred to as normative principles in applied ethics. And what these principles do, they're just guiding principles as to how we are acting ethically in our community. So the first principle is personal benefit. You acknowledge the extent to which an action produces beneficial consequences for the individual in question. The next term is social benefit, and it acknowledges the extent to which an action produces beneficial consequences for our society. And then there's the principle of benevolence, and that's to help those in need. And I think that we certainly can agree that, the work that we're doing is centered around trying to help those that are in need. The principle of paternalism. Assist others in pursuing their best interests when they cannot do it themselves. The principle of harm. Do not harm others. How many times have we said that in our field, that we're, working and that we don't want to cause harm to others? The principle of honesty. Do not deceive others. And then there's the principle of lawfulness. Do not violate the law. The principle of autonomy. Acknowledge a person's freedom over his and her actions or physical body. The principle of justice. Acknowledge a person's right to due process, fair compensation for harm done, and fair distribution of benefits. And then there's rights. acknowledge a person's rights to life, information, privacy, free expression, and safety. And while some of those terms, may seem clinical, or some of those examples may seem clinical, in our prevention professional world, these are principles that we too should be holding dear to ourselves. These are things that we also should be doing. We should not be causing harm to others. We should not be deceiving others. We certainly shouldn't be violating the law. And definitely, we are here as servants, and we should be here to help serve those that are in need. So, up to this point, we've had an opportunity to define the term ethics. We've looked at the term applied ethics and the principles that are related to applied ethics, and have had a chance to see how they relate to some of the work that we do. So next, we're going to look at the process we use to make an ethical decision. And there are several ethical decision-making models that are out there. So at this time, I want to give participants an opportunity to maybe name some of the decision-making models or frameworks or ethical decision-making models, however how you refer to them. Give some examples of some of the models that maybe you've used, or some of the models that you know about when it comes to facing ethical dilemmas and having to make a decision. Do anybody have any particular model that they use? Can anybody tell me why it is important to have a plan for addressing ethical dilemmas?
Latasha, I think that a plan is a great idea, although I do not have one. You're making me think now. It takes the emotion out of it, I think, and it gives you a step-by-step thoughtful process. So that would be my thought there.
And I definitely agree with that. I agree with that. Anybody else? Let's see. I'm checking the chat. Minor responded because you have to decide quickly, often. Joshua commented to have consistency in making ethical decisions. Yes. That's exactly right. Ethical dilemmas can sometimes sneak up on us. Maybe not all the time, but they can sneak up on us. So we need to have a process for being able to think through these types of situations so that we are not acting emotional whenever we decide what decision needs to be made. So what I've done is, well, let's look at this nice little quote before we move on. It takes less time to do things right than to explain why you did them wrong. I like that quote. And it's a really good example of why we should have some type of plan for addressing ethical dilemmas in a strategic way. So what I've done is, and this is just for us to just kind of put our eyes on, these are just some different examples of models, ethical decision-making models. And I'm not exactly sure why I had the actual name of the model, and it's not there. But this is just a picture of a model and the different steps that it has. What are some of the things you see in this model? What is it asking you to do?
Identify the problem.
Identify the problem. Okay. Anybody else? What do you see in this model? I see steps that are supposed to help
Make the best decision.
get us to the best decision. Okay. Okay. Here's another model, and this is a Venn diagram, and I definitely found this one pretty interesting, because as you look at this particular one, it has the different areas. And if you happen to be in area 1, then it's profitable, legal, ethical, and it's telling you to go for it. But if you're in area 2A, it may be profitable and legal, but it's telling you to proceed with caution. What else do you see as it relates to this model? I see an opportunity to be able to decide whether or not you're acting ethically. I see an opportunity for it to tell you whether or not you're acting legally. Okay. So we'll move on to the next model. Again, this is another model that gives you different steps. The first model with steps had 8 steps. This one has 6. But again, it kind of follows the same process, and, you know, having you to identify what your problem is, and then just kind of go through different steps until you can get to a decision about an action that you're going to make. Anybody have any thoughts or any questions about this particular ethical decision-making model? Okay, and again, this is another ethical decision-making model process. Gives you steps. And then this particular model actually takes the word ethical and spells it out in steps. So I just wanted to just share those particular models. The model that we're going to give a little bit more attention to and kind of have, at least I hope we're going to have some discussion on it. You guys are awful quiet. This particular ethical decision-making model comes from the Bay Group. And it also, it's just like some of the other models that we've looked at. It carries you through different steps until you get to until you get to a plan, and it tells you to implement that plan and evaluate. So what we're going to do is we're going to just dig a little deeper into this particular model. So the first step of this model, it says to clarify the issues. So, you know, what are some probing questions, or what are some things that you would need to do in order to clarify the issue at hand? What are some things that you would need to ask yourself or steps that you would need to take to clarify an issue?
I guess just asking the question if it's ethical or not, just asking yourself that.
Okay.
Am I being heard right now? I don't know.
You are.
Oh, perfect. So this is April Case. So I'm listening, and you asked, clarifying the issue, what question will we ask? I think one is along what someone just said about, is it ethical? How is this situation making me feel? How is this situation making somebody else feel?
Yes, that's great. Yep. In the chat, someone said figure out exactly why there is a conflict. Okay. Another question is, or, another probing idea to be thinking about is, what is the potential for conflict with support of stakeholders' values? So is this a conflict, within yourself, or is this an external conflict with stakeholders? Another thing to think about when you're trying to clarify what the issues are is, who has a stake in the decision? And what are the forces, influences, or characteristics of the situation that puts pressure on me or the organization to act in one particular way or another? So I think the point is certainly is to make sure that you understand what the situation is. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what the situation is. It may not even be your situation. It could be a situation that somebody else is bringing to you, but you still want to make sure that you understand clearly what the issues are. And then another thing, or the next step, is to get the facts. And how can we get the facts?
Asking questions.
Right. Asking questions to maybe clarify what the issues are. We can also look at whether or not there are regulations, policies, or standards of professional conduct that apply. Something else I think that we have to recognize is, do we have all the facts? If we don't know what they are, then how can we find out? What do we need to go to get all the facts that relate to whatever the unethical situation may be? Another thing to maybe think about is, what has been past practice relative to this area of decision making, and how was it perceived by those that were affected? So has this situation come up before? And if so, how was it handled? Do we know if, when it was handled the last time, if folks thought that or perceived that it was handled correctly? So certainly gathering facts around the ethical or possible ethical situation is something that we need to do. Definitely looking at regulations and policies and standards is a way for us to understand whether or not there's some type of ethical violation that has occurred. And a really excellent comment in the chat room is, just because we've done something a certain way before doesn't mean that we should still keep doing it that way. So certainly, if this situation keeps coming up, it may be that, it's a situation that's not been handled correctly. So then next on the list is to develop options. And when we're developing options, we're looking at what possible courses of actions can we take. What are likely to be the choices preferred by those involved or affected by the decision? And what would I do if I were the only person affected by this decision? That's something that's really important. So what are some other things we need to consider whenever we're thinking about or when we're in the process of developing options? Any thoughts, any other thoughts or ideas about that? Okay, I'll move on. Assess the options. So once you've developed, what some of your possible options are, you need to look at what are the likely consequences? What are the benefits or the harms of the options that you've come up with? Something that Mina has said is don't limit yourself whenever you're creating options. Sometimes we do limit ourselves. Sometimes we need to just take time to just maybe think outside the box. And maybe it's not something that we've considered before. And maybe it's an idea that we've gotten from somebody else. And it may not be something that you've considered, but, we certainly need to think outside the box when it comes to coming up with options. Something else that we need to think about when we're assessing the options that we're coming up with is, are any of the options prohibited because of potential violation of civil or contractual or other rights of anyone that may be affected? So that's something that you certainly should take seriously, is whenever you're looking at the options, how is it going to affect other people? Or are you violating any laws when you're looking at the options? Another really important way to assess the option is, does each option treat all that are effective equally or proportionally? Would those affected be likely to perceive each solution as fair? And how many times have, we've possibly been in a situation where we felt like, well, I wasn't treated fairly. Or maybe, some families that you are serving or something that's going on in your community, you felt like there was a certain group of people that maybe wasn't treated fairly as a result of an option or a decision that was made in the community. And then last but not least, something that you can do when assessing the option is to look at to what extent is each option compatible with your organizational values. Thank you, Mina. She's saying that when assessing options, it can be challenging because there are usually pros and cons, and sometimes we don't like the cons, even though it might cause the least amount of harm or potential harm, and that is true. So we've clarified the issues, we've gotten the facts, we've developed some options, we've assessed the options. Now we need to make a decision and test it. So, when looking at making a decision and trying to test that decision, some of the things that we need to think about is which option best balances costs and benefits or rights of those affected and standards of fairness. And that's, kind of speaking to what Mina just said about the challenges of coming up and looking at the pros and the cons. You want to make sure that you review the option again. Is there another option that would achieve the same results at less cost to those affected? And cost doesn't necessarily have to be financial cost. When I say cost, we're not specifically talking about financial costs. And then lastly, when it comes to making a decision, we need to think about whether or not you would feel comfortable explaining your decision to your boss or to your senior managers, to your family, to a reporter. Why or why not? So how comfortable are you with the decision that you're making? And how knowledgeable are you about the decision that you're making? And then after that, of course, you want to develop a plan to implement your decision. You want to think about the steps that you're going to take to implement the plan. You need to think about what resources you're going to need to accomplish your plan and where you're going to get them from. You also need to think about what could go wrong in your plan and how can you prevent something from going wrong. Now, are we able to perceive the future and know all the possible things that can go wrong in a given situation?
No.
No. Thank you. No. No. Certainly not. But you want to do your best, you know, when it comes to making an ethical decision. You want to do your best in making sure that you've explored all possible options, and you want to make sure that you explore, you know, the pros and cons. And you know, there again, we've already stated that generally on a day-to-day basis, we probably don't just sit down and say, oh, I need an ethical decision-making model. And, you know, but when that time comes, that's the reason why it's so important to have a way to think through, the, you know, an ethical dilemma or some type of crisis that you may be faced with, because those decisions may not just affect you. They may affect your organization. They can be affecting your family. They could be affecting your whole community. So you want to have a process of being able to think thoroughly through what the best decision may be. And then, of course, you want to go out and you want to implement your plan. And after you implement your plan, of course, we always want to evaluate. And why do we want to evaluate?
So we know the effects of what we're trying to do and also what could be better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It goes back to what we said earlier about, you know, has this issue come up before, and has it been dealt with before? And if so, why is it coming back up again? Well, maybe it's because a decision was made, it wasn't thought through, and the decisions that are being made are not the best decisions. So you want to just make sure that you're carefully evaluating the decisions that you make, so that you'll know whether or not they're being effective. And if not, you have the opportunity to go back and say, okay, you know, we tried this, you know, it's not working. We need to do something different whenever this situation comes up again. Can somebody give me the definition of insanity? I heard it. I think somebody said point. Say it.
And repeating the same behavior but expecting a different outcome. Right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, and that's something we certainly want to try to avoid, especially when you're dealing with making ethical decisions. Thank you, Lindsay. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same thing. Somebody just shared, I lost it. Let me get back to it. Just a thought, you know, the more work that we do with collaboratives, the more opportunities we will face around ethics. Yes, absolutely. And there are different sets of rules and guidelines within different fields. What may be okay in one industry might be a conflict in another one. And that's exactly right, Mina. So I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was thinking about this ethics webinar and thinking about things that were going to be important to bring out today. That's exactly what I said. That's exactly the frame of mind that I was in, because we're doing so much more in our communities and working with different agencies, and everybody have a different thought process about different things and how they operate. We definitely have to be careful about some of the decisions that we make, and also, our relationships with other folks. So that is a really, really good point, and exactly some of the things that I was thinking about for today's webinar as far as conversation was concerned. Do anybody else have any thoughts or ideas about the ethical decision-making model and why it's important to have, and the steps that we should consider when trying to solve or work through an ethical dilemma? Okay. So next we're going to review what our obligations are as a substance abuse prevention professional. Each profession today is guided by codes of ethics, wherein ethical values and principles have been standardized in adopted rules or expected and acceptable behavior. So codes of ethics often cover several areas. And while we're going to look further on, we're going to look more specifically at some of, we're going to look at the certification board and our guiding principles and code of ethics. The point that Mina brought up about the relationships that we have in the community with other organizations, I wanted to bring this up because these are some general code of ethics that, regardless of where you're working, who you work for, what industry you're in, these are just some of the general codes of ethics that everybody should be following. So the first one is a conduct as a specified professional. And under that, we all should have integrity, which governs high standards of personal conduct that includes but are not limited to avoiding unlawful conduct, sexual misconduct, fraud, and related conduct. We all should be competent and should have some form of professional development, which may include maintaining proficiency in the practice skills of our function and refusal to practice outside the boundaries of such. Now, what would be an example for prevention professionals, specifically when it says, and refusal to practice outside the boundaries of such? Can anybody, it's just one quick thing that came to my mind, and it comes up, it has, over the years that I've been in prevention, it has come up for me several times, and I've had to clarify.
Can you ask the question one more time?
I'm sorry, I think somebody said it. Okay, so the question is, the statement, refusal to practice outside the boundaries of such. As prevention professionals, in what way have you had to address not practicing outside of your boundaries? Yes, I see it in the chat. Anything that crosses the line to counseling. Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking. When I tell people that I'm a substance abuse prevention professional or that I'm a certified substance abuse prevention consultant, a lot of times automatically people think that I'm a counselor. And they want to know if I can have a counseling session with their child or with a student. So we have to make sure that we're not doing treatment. Okay, that we're working within our scope of practice. Okay. And then another thing that we need to look at when it says conduct as a specified professional is non-discriminatory behavior, which safeguards appropriate treatment regardless of race, creed, gender, and like. Now, treatment is not specifically used in the term of providing treatment, but it's just your interaction with other folk. Just making sure that you're not being, having a discriminatory practice. So the next thing on that list is ethical responsibility to clients. And what is our ethical? Somebody, if you don't mind just tossing out, what is our ethical responsibility? What is our ethical responsibility to clients? And I'm saying clients here, and I see Mina says how we define clients has changed a bit. Clients now is the larger population, and that's exactly right, because clients in the prevention world doesn't specifically mean one person. The client could be our community, and I think that's what you're getting to, Mina. Is that correct? Yes. She said yes, and that's exactly how I see it. Is that when we use the term client, we're not in prevention world. We're not talking about clients in the sense that a clinician would use the word client, and certainly we have communities that are our clients. So what are our ethical responsibilities to our clients or to our community or to those that we are serving? What are some, when it comes to code of ethics, what are some things that you think about when it comes to our ethical responsibility? One of the first things that I think about is that we should avoid any situation that may lead to a conflict of interest. Okay? So, and then of course we have confidentiality and privacy, which protects all information obtained in the course of professional practice. Ensuring, I'm looking at the chat, it says ensuring that we provide assistance and not harm. Yes. To share truthful information. And Mina, you're asking me to expand on conflict of interest? Is that what you're saying? Okay, so let's talk about conflict of interest. Can somebody tell me what it means for there to be a conflict of interest? Let's start there first.
It may be something that would hinder you from giving the person the proper care or treatment that they need. I.e., if it's someone you know, you may not feel comfortable delivering services to them.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Any relationships that you may have with them. It could be family or anything of that sort.
Okay. So let me read this to you, and I'm glad Mina asked that question. Oh, before I do that, I see what Mark is saying, a situation that would take advantage of using my advantage. Okay? A conflict of interest is a situation in which a person or organization is involved in multiple interests, financial or otherwise, one of which could possibly corrupt the motivation or decision-making of that individual or organization. I'm looking at the chat, so I'm gonna I don't know if you all can see what I see in the chat. So Mina is saying that she was just wanting to think more about conflict of interest within environmental prevention work. She said she don't have the answer, but that's what she wanted us to think about. So can somebody help Mina out? Are there any ideas when we're thinking about conflict of interest within environmental prevention work? It's not particularly something I've given some thought to, Mina. I guess I'm like you. I don't have the answer, but I'm certainly opening up the floor for anyone that can help Mina out in that. And Mina, as I always say, if I can't find your answer today, give me a couple of days and we can come back to it. Okay, so we're going to move on. And Mina, I'm going to, you and I can have a sidebar conversation in reference to your question about conflict of interest within environmental prevention, if that's okay. So the next thing that, when you're talking about general code of ethics, the ethical responsibility to colleagues. And this definitely goes back to something that, that Mina mentioned earlier, the fact that we work with the community. We work with so many other agencies within our community. And so we have an ethical responsibility to those colleagues to make sure that we're treating them with respect, fairness, and courtesy. Also, with our colleagues within our profession, our colleagues, folk that we work with on the job, making sure that we are treating them with professional consideration. And then we have a responsibility to our employer, and that is to adhere to the protocols and the expectations of our employee agency, and to avoid situations that may lead to conflict of interest. And then next we have responsibility to the profession. And the way to, the code of ethics or the values that fall under that one is the enhancement of values, ethics, knowledge, and the mission of the profession. We got to understand what we do, why we do it, and how we're going to do it. We need to make sure that we ourselves are adhering to the highest standards of competency, that we're receiving the highest level of education and training as it relates to our field, and that we are willing to be committed to upholding legal standards of our profession. And then the responsibility to society. The promotion of general welfare of the society in which we serve, and fair and accurate reporting to the public in all manners. And some of those things are things that, we've already talked about whenever we was looking at our ethical decision-making model. So, Section .0500 of the North Carolina Substance Abuse Professional Practice Board, which we should all know is the governing body for substance abuse professionals in North Carolina, lays out the ethical principles of conduct for substance abuse professionals. And so what you're looking at now on the screen is the purpose and scope. And the purpose and scope reads that, A, the ethical principles governing the credentialed substance abuse professional are established to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And that the primary goal, B, is the primary goal of this code is to set forth principles to guide the conduct of the substance abuse professional, The board may deem violation of these standards malpractice, negligence, incompetence, or engaging in conduct that could result in harm or injury to the public. C is ethical principles shall provide a standard for the substance abuse professional in his or her professional roles, relationships, and responsibilities. And D is upon submission of an application for a credential, each applicant shall review the ethical standards in these rules, sign the applicant's Code of Ethical Conduct form, and return it to the board agreeing to uphold the ethical principles of conduct. So if you are registered or credentialed with the certification board, you've already agreed to this professional code, to this professional ethical code of conduct. So as prevention professionals, this is one of the these are some of the governing principles that guide or lead how we should act as professionals ethically. And then I'm not going to go through each one of these, but also within section 0500 of the Certification Practice Board Ethical Code, it also has a list of principles. And so, you know, if you have not had the chance to go through these principles, you really should, because these are the ethical principles that are what we're held to. These are the things that, as a professional, lead and guide how we are to act professionally for ourselves, how we're to act in our community, and how we're to act within our agencies. Do anyone have any questions about these? How many of you have had the opportunity to look at these or have actually read through these principles of conduct? If you haven't, I really strongly encourage that you do. It's really they're very informative, but there again, they are our guiding principles for how we're to act ethically within this profession. And then as a prevention professional, another thing that leads and guides the way we are to act professionally as prevention professionals is the performance domains. And the performance domains are created by the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium, and they are the governing body that oversees the exam of the prevention certification. Well, actually, not just prevention, but also substance abuse professionals across the nation. They have they're the one who set the standards and the job tags. So what we're looking at right now is the domain number 6. As a prevention professional, we certainly should be familiar with all of the domains, but domain number 6 speaks specifically about professional growth and responsibility. And within domain number 6, as you can see that I have highlighted, it states that we should adhere to all legal, professional, and ethical principles. And it also states that we should demonstrate responsible and ethical use of public and private funds. And that was something that I mentioned early on in the webinar. Many of our organizations receive local, state, and grant funding. We have to be accountable for those funds, and we have to make sure that we're spending those funds or using those funds in an ethical way. So if you're not familiar with the, with the domains, please go to the ICRC, and they have them listed. So the next thing that we're going to talk about in the last few minutes that we have available on the webinar is ethics in the workplace. And so my little quote here says, can't have a $1 million dream with a minimum wage work ethic. So I would like for us to talk about some of these questions as we go through them. And there may be some questions that you've given some thought to, or there may be just some questions of self-reflection. There may be questions that you've seen before, but I'm just asking you to please chime in as we go through and look at some of these questions as they relate to ethics in the workplace. So I'm asking you, are there clear ethics policies in place in your workplace? And you all can either shout out your answers, or you can use the chat.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Next, who is responsible for the ethics policy in your organization? Do you know? I know for my organization, it's our HR department. And it may be the same, you know, for many of you, that is your HR department. So next, I'm asking you, how are your organization's policies communicated?
We have a policies and procedures book, and it's renewed yearly. And then with my other occupation, there's a certification renewal process, so you have to go over the ethics at that time.
Okay. I know for our organization, Robinson Healthcare, we do have a policy and procedure manual that specifically has a section in it for ethics, but we get monthly, if not weekly, reminders from our HR department, and it's just, they call it policy reminders, and they they're just reminders, just because a lot of times you get hired, you get that manual, and then maybe once a year, like you said, you maybe have to re-sign that you've received it or that you've read it. And sometimes we haven't actually read through it. So our organization sends out policy reminders, and that's how it's communicated throughout the organization. Anybody else like to share? Are these policies clearly visible? And like I said, again, for us, they're visible for us because, we get that email as a policy reminder. But within your organization, are they visible? Are they something that you could actually get your hands on if you needed to look up a policy? Next, are the organization's policies communicated to others externally? So, Mina was mentioning earlier how we're working with other organizations in our community, and they may have other thoughts and ideas and policies in place. How do we know what their policies are, and how do we communicate to them what ours are? Just something to think about. How does the public view the ethics of your organization? What does the community think about your organization ethically? Is your organization an organization that the community trusts? how do your consumers view the ethics of the organization? How do the consumers that you serve, your participants, there again, the community, other community agencies, how do they view the ethics of your organization? What effect does the organization's ethics have on how it operates its business? Does the organization's reputation help or hurt its business? How many of us know of an organization in our community, or maybe not in our community, but just know of an organization that just has a bad reputation? They have a bad reputation for business. How does that help or hurt the business? The reputation. That's something to think about. And then the last couple of ones that I want you to think about is, do most employees feel confident that the organization would do what is most ethical regardless of the situation? Is there an ethics champion in your organization? Would ethics be part of a possible promotion consideration? And then the last thing, I want you to just be thinking about is, are there double standards concerning ethics in your organization? I know we don't want to tell on our agencies, but that is just something that, you yourself can just be thinking about. Are there double standards concerning ethics in your organization? So these questions regarding ethics in the workplace are just probing questions that, as we think about ethics and as we think about having an ethical environment around us, these are just questions that we can ask ourselves about our organization and its internal workings. Do anybody have any questions about those? Like I said, I was just trying to give just some thought-provoking questions, just some principles or some things just for you to think about as it relates to ethics in our workplace. And if anybody would, I'm not sure if Jamie is sending this out, but if anybody would like to just have a list of those questions, just so you can just do an internal evaluation of your organization, I don't mind sharing them. So the last couple of things that I want to talk about as it relates to ethics is obstacles to ethical behavior. Ethics must begin at the top of an organization. It is a leadership issue, and the chief executive must set the example. So my question to you all is, can someone share what they think may be obstacles to ethical behavior? What are some obstacles that keep people from acting ethically?
Timelines and deadlines.
Oh, yes. That's a good one, and it's not even one that I have listed, so that's really good. Yes. What else? Is there anything else that you all can think of that are obstacles as to why folk don't act ethically?
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge. Okay.
Money.
Money.
I don't know.
Absolutely. So we're going to go through some of the ones that I have listed here. Lack of knowledge of standards. As professionals, we are charged to know the rules of conduct governing our behavior and to update ourselves on new additions to the standards. So just plain on lack of knowledge and not understanding the rules of conduct. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to share, or one of the reasons why I shared the certification, the practice board, what our purpose and scope, what the purpose and scope is, and to show you our rules for conduct for governing our behavior. Because sometimes, I mean, those are not things that people just generally just say, oh, let me just go look that up. Those are things that we really should be aware of and know. Somebody said it. Financial incentive, money. This relates to financial gains possible when we look the other way. But I also want to, to state that the gain could not only be in money, but in product or favors as well. The cut rate, the special gift, the link to the right person who will pull some special strings. So sometimes financial incentives may not just be in the form of actual money, but it is a benefit, some type of benefit that you're getting. Another obstacle is perfectionism, the fear of making a good decision. Sometimes we just have a fear of whether or not we're going to be able to make the right decision, and that could be an obstacle. And then there's the fear of criticism. We worry about whether or not we're going to be chastised by others because of the decision that we made. So we just don't make a decision. Personal and professional immaturity. The lack of maturity needed to make good choices. Sometimes people just lack the ability to be able to make the good choice, or to make a proper choice, or to make the most ethical decision because of their lack of maturity. And then back to our old handy decision-making model. The lack of a decision-making model. You do not have a method for resolving ethical issues. We talked about that earlier. So we have just a few minutes left. And in that time, I just want to just pause and maybe get some examples from the field. Now, I've done a lot of talking. I'm ready to stop talking. But this is just an opportunity for maybe someone to share maybe a quick scenario or a quick example of an ethical dilemma that maybe you faced, or maybe you've heard of, or maybe just a made-up dilemma that possibly we could end up facing in our profession. Do I have anybody that would be willing to share a scenario?
I don't know if I have a scenario really, but I have like a comment about the last few things you said, where we're worried sometimes about making a mistake or being a perfectionist. And I have a nurse friend who said they've got this awesome way of like being real with, you're a person, you're going to make mistakes, so come forward when you've done that. So that's kind of ethically protecting, someone's life. So it was really cool to hear that, because I've never heard it like that, that there's almost this like expectation that you're going to do something sometimes, since you're human beings, but it's better to come forth, admit it, and move on. So I thought that was really cool. And then, so I guess that'd be like the perfect ethic champion that you mentioned in one of those questions.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? I know we've come across some major decisions or situations that we've had to face in this prevention professional? What about working with other stakeholders in the community? What type of possible ethical dilemmas could we be faced with working with community stakeholders?
I mean, the motivation for who receives services or support and who doesn't.
Okay. What about situations where we're providing a service or hosting programs where family members may be involved? Is it unethical for them to participate?
It depends.
It depends. Okay. So we're in prevention. We have a community event that's going on, and we've invited our family. That's it. Cut and dry.
Well, then, no, that's okay, as long as we're not discussing, you know, a particular individual's information with the whole family. Then, yeah, everyone should come.
Okay. But I see your sister in line getting some of the free items that we're passing out to the community. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. She could be getting them for a friend of hers or you know, anyone.
She could be getting them for herself. And I think that's the thing that we need to realize is that when we're working in the community, you're not providing treatment. You know, prevention is different. And I think that conversation has come up in several other trainings that I've been in where we're talking about ethics and we're talking about conflict of interest. You know, if your goal is to get as many people in the community to come to an event and you happen to invite your family and friends, then they get the benefit of whatever it is you're offering to the community as participants in that program, you know, whatever it is for that day. And sometimes, I mean, I've never had to justify that, but I think sometimes that people could, depending on what field they're in, people could look at that as a possible conflict, and that goes to the conversation we had earlier about it all depends on what industry you're in, that it may be a conflict of interest for folk who are in treatment not to be treating their, immediate family members, but in prevention, it's okay to invite the family out to a community event that you're sponsoring by your agency. So that's just an example that I wanted to give because I know that that's something that has come up in the past. Do anyone have any other questions or comments? If not, as I end, I'm going to end with a couple of quotes. The time is always right to do what is right. And that quote is from Dr. Martin Luther King. And this quote, I'm not sure who it's from, but it is an excellent quote. Wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. Thank you all for participating, and if there are no other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you, Latasha. It's 11:27, so we have finished just a few minutes earlier. And one reminder, please email the NCTTA Center at nctta@drugfreenc.org if you viewed or participated in this webinar but did not register. That way we can make sure that we have a documentation of attendance and we can send out your certificate. In the meantime, thank you for your participation, and we look forward to talking with everybody soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job. It was very enjoyable.